In the blistering summer of 1847, on the perilous banks of the Brazos River in Texas, a single act of courageous desperation would alter the life of a solitary widow, leading to an encounter that defied all the frontier's notions of friendship, honor, and the unbreakable ties formed between adversaries. When Abigail Hawthorne rescued a drowning Comanche boy from a lethal quicksand pit, she was unaware that her impulsive decision would summon an entire tribe to her doorstep. This event would irrevocably change the destinies of two worlds entrenched in violence and distrust. The relentless Texas sun bore down upon the modest homestead that had been Abigail Hawthorne's sanctuary for the past 3 years. At 32, she had already suffered the loss of her husband and 2 infant children, all claimed by the fever that ravaged the settlement of Cedar Creek in the winter of 1847. Most women in her situation would have returned to their families back east, but Abigail's fierce independence, a trait that both intrigued and concerned her late husband Thomas, kept her rooted to the land. She remained, resolved to cultivate a future from the 160 acres they had claimed together. Before we continue, let us know where you're joining us from. If this story resonates with you, be sure to subscribe, as there's more to come tomorrow. Until then, take care and see you next time. Bye. Later. The end. Better too late than never. Thank you, second wife. Miss Morning that Q it's here to fix my deal before sending to the taste buckler. For all the wrongs I've done, I'd rather take some after them. I'll get that out of there. Yeah, I'd rather think about it. Well, squeeze them into a fee, bro. Excuse you're making after all. You're the only one paying extra fee about the long journey it's taking. If I don't have my money, why are we wasting your precious money? I do mean it for the sake of myself and this broth, which I didn't think I wanted to deal with. Too late. Had I made more money with you? Much to be ashamed of. This did such a terrible thing to me I had no guarantee. A skill Thomas had insisted she master during their brief marriage. Run. This particular morning in late July, the heat was already oppressive by sunrise. Abigail finished her morning chores early, hoping to beat the worst of the day's temperature. She decided to walk down to the river to check the fishing lines she had set the evening before, carrying a woven basket and her father's old hunting knife for cleaning any catch. The path to the river wound through dense stands of oak and mesquite, providing blessed shade as Abigail made her way toward the water. She had walked this route hundreds of times, knew every fallen log and bend in the trail, but she never took the landscape for granted. This was Comanche territory, and while the tribe had been relatively quiet in recent months, their raids on settlements throughout Texas were legendary and brutal. Abigail's neighbors insisted, and the people of Cedar Creek often questioned her sanity for living alone, so close to the river, a natural highway that war parties used to move unseen through the territory. But the isolation also provided advantages. The river gave her fresh water, fish, and fertile soil for her garden. More importantly, the solitude had helped her heal from the devastating losses that had nearly broken her spirit 3 years ago. She reached the riverbank, and she saw the water. She looked out of the riverbank and checked her lines, pleased to find 2 good-sized catfish and a bass waiting in her makeshift trap. The river was running lower than usual, exposing muddy banks and creating new channels that hadn't existed the week before. Recent rains upstream had shifted the current, creating treacherous pools of quicksand where unwary travelers might find themselves trapped. As Abigail worked to clean her catch, she noticed movement across the river. Perhaps 200 yards downstream, a rider was approaching the water's edge on a painted pony, moving with the fluid grace she had learned to associate with Comanche horsemen. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the distinctive war paint and feathered lance that marked this as no ordinary traveler. The Comanche warrior appeared to be alone, which was unusual. They typically traveled in groups, especially this deep into settled territory. Abigail slowly reached for the hunting knife at her belt, though. She knew it would be useless against a mounted warrior at this distance. Her rifle was back at the cabin, a mistake she cursed herself for making. The warrior dismounted at the river's edge, apparently intending to water his horse. Abigail held perfectly still, hoping the thick cottonwood growth would conceal her presence. From her hiding spot, she could see that the rider was young but full of energy. She began to lose her sight, but she could see the rider still. The rider's eyes were clear. He was looking at the road, and it was clear that he was still. Abigail's eyes were clear, as if she had seen a rider before. Abigail was still. She was looking at the road, as if she had seen a rider before. Abigail was still. She was looking at the road, and she was looking at the road. Perhaps 16 or 17, with the lean build of youth rather than the seasoned bulk of an experienced warrior. His movements suggested urgency, as if he were being pursued or was on some important mission. The young Comanche led his pony into the shallow water, but something went wrong almost immediately. The horse spooked, rearing back and pulling free from his grasp. As the pony scrambled back to solid ground, the young warrior found himself standing in what appeared to be knee-deep water, but was actually something far more dangerous. Abigail watched in horror as the boy began to sink. What had looked like shallow river bottom was actually quicksand, hidden beneath a thin layer of water and debris. The more the young Comanche struggled, the faster he sank. Within moments the muddy trap had him up to his waist, and his desperate struggle was over. The young man was in a state of utter terror. He was in a state of utter terror. The young Comanche was a man of the world. His movements were only making his situation worse. Every instinct Abigail possessed screamed at her to run. This was a Comanche warrior, member of a tribe that had killed dozens of her neighbors, burned homesteads, and taken captives throughout Texas. His people had shown no mercy to white settlers, and she owed him nothing. The smart thing to do was slip away quietly and let nature take its course. But as she watched the terror on the young man's face, saw him sink deeper within the water, the boy was forced to hide in a corner of the stormy aqueduct. The boy, in a deep Aterside bath and served his body as a ritual garden, was given the Jackson's reckon, and the water was poured onto the man. He was then prepared to face death, and he pushed the water away to the other side. As the boy sat on the edge, his heart was pounding at a speed that couldn't be measured. The water was running from the room where the man had been, and the water was pouring from the depths of the well in the cave. He was trying to find the man, but he was unable to. He knew that he could not escape. The woman was prepared to jump from the cobbled hideout over the poker hill. She had tried makeshift rope. The young Comanche was now chest-deep in the quicksand, his movements becoming more frantic as he realized the gravity of his situation. "Stop struggling," Abigail called out, her voice carrying clearly across the water. "You're making it worse." The boy's head snapped up, his dark eyes wide with shock at hearing English spoken. For a moment their gazes locked across the distance, and Abigail saw something that surprised her, not the savage hatred she expected, but intelligence, fear, and a desperate hope that she might help rather than harm him. Abigail waded into the river, testing each step carefully to avoid the same trap that had caught the young warrior. The far current was stronger than it appeared from shore, and she had to fight to maintain her footing on the slippery rocks beneath the surface. The makeshift rope of branches was now in her hands, and she could not hold it back. She could not hold it back, and the branches and cloth felt fragile in her hands, but it was the only chance either of them had. "Catch this," she shouted, throwing one end of her improvised lifeline toward the sinking boy. The young Comanche's reflexes were quick despite his predicament. He caught the bundle of branches on the first throw, gripping them with both hands while trying to keep his head above the surface of the quicksand. The rope held, but Abigail immediately realized she didn't have the strength to pull him free on her own. The suction of the quicksand was incredibly powerful, and the young warrior was nearly shoulder-deep in the deadly trap. "Don't pull," Abigail called out, remembering something her father had told her about quicksand during their journey west. "Try to lean back and spread your weight. Move slowly." The boy seemed to understand her tone, if not her words. He stopped his frantic struggling and tried to follow her gestures, leaning backward and attempting to distribute his weight more evenly. The technique helped slow his descent, but he was still trapped and losing the battle against the inexorable suction. Abigail looked around desperately for additional help. The young warrior's pony stood on the far bank, reins trailing, occasionally whickering nervously as if sensing its rider's distress. An idea began to form in Abigail's mind: dangerous, but possibly their only hope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing the river bottom, Abigail made her way toward the opposite shore. The young Comanche watched her approach with a mixture of hope and suspicion, clearly uncertain about her intentions. When she reached shallow water, she slowly approached the river bottom. Abigail's body was in a state of shock. Abigail managed to catch the trailing reins and led the horse to a position where she could tie her makeshift rope to the saddle horn. The young warrior understood her plan immediately and adjusted his grip to give her more working room. On 3, Abigail called, out though she doubted he understood the words. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and slapped the pony's flank to encourage it forward. The horse was stronger than any human could be, and the rope held under the strain. Slowly, agonizingly, the young Comanche began to emerge from the quicksand's grip. The suction fought them every inch of the way, but gradually the boy was able to work his shoulders free. The boy didn't need a rope, but a hammer and an axe and a sword. The boy was able to draw the bow, pick up the rope, and strike a more dangerous blow. The young warrior managed to take the cane from the trailing reins. The young warrior had steel and a knife, but he was able to pull his spear from the back of his hand. The young warrior had a little weight, but he was able to work his way to the left of the horse. The young warrior managed to bring the bow and the rope to the left of his hands. The young warrior was now very smiling. He was able to see something more of himself with his skin and his feet. The boy began to marvel at the lack of a way to get the bow down. The boy was able to see the arrow into the torch of power, and the torch was that way. The boy did not rise from the rope, and approached Abigail with obvious caution. He was tall for his age, with the distinctive features and bearing she associated with Comanche nobility. His clothing, what she could see beneath the mud, was finely made with intricate beadwork that suggested high status within his tribe. The young warrior touched his chest and spoke a single word that sounded like Dakota, his name, Abigail realized. She repeated the gesture, saying Abigail clearly. Dakota nodded and attempted to repeat her name, his pronunciation careful but recognizable. For several minutes they stood facing each other across a cultural divide that had claimed thousands of lives on both sides. Dakota gestured toward the quicksand, then toward Abigail, clearly trying to express his gratitude. Dakota smiled. The first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him, and for a moment the years of violence and mistrust between their peoples seemed to be the first to appear. Dakota's expression grew serious. As he looked around, clearly remembering whatever urgent business had brought him to the river. He mounted his pony with the natural grace of someone who had been riding since childhood, then turned back to Abigail with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. The young Comanche reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something small, carefully wrapped. He tossed it to Abigail, who caught it instinctively. When she unwrapped the soft leather, she found a beautifully carved piece of turquoise shaped like a bear strung on a leather cord. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of a master artisan. Dakota touched his chest, then pointed to the necklace, then to Abigail. The meaning was clear. This was a personal gift, something precious to him that he was offering in gratitude. He was willing to give and will do for her. Dakota, who didn't want to be held back, was taken in by the woman's hand by her hand and held her by her neck. Him that he was offering in gratitude for his life. Abigail placed the cord around her neck, touched the turquoise bear, and nodded her acknowledgement. With a final gesture that might have been a salute or a promise, Dakota wheeled his pony and rode away, disappearing into the dense brush on the far side of the river. Within moments it was as if he had never been there at all, except for the turquoise bear resting against Abigail's chest and the memory of dark eyes filled with intelligence and unexpected humanity. Abigail made her way back to her cabin in a daze, her mind struggling to process what had just occurred. She had saved the life of a Comanche warrior, someone her neighbors would consider a mortal enemy. But in those moments by the river, she had seen only a young man in desperate need of help, and she had responded with the best of her strength. In the place of her concern for the safe survival of the citizens, she ultimately found a human connection in the end. You know how strong the family bond is. Some might see her as a traitor to her own people. That night, as Abigail lay in bed listening to the sounds of the Texas wilderness, she had no way of knowing that her simple act of human compassion had set in motion events that would challenge everything the frontier understood about honor, loyalty, and the possibility of peace between sworn enemies. The turquoise bear seemed to pulse with warmth against her chest, as if carrying some significance beyond its obvious beauty. 3 days later she would discover just how profound that significance truly was. The morning of the 3rd day dawned with an unsettling stillness that made Abigail's skin prickle with unease. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing, and her chickens huddled together in their coop, instead of venturing out to scratch for insects as they normally did. The very air felt charged with anticipation, like the moments before a violent thunderstorm breaks across the Texas plains. Abigail had spent the previous 2 days in a state of restless anxiety, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the horizon for signs of movement. The encounter with Dakota had shaken her more than she cared to admit, not because of fear, but because of the profound connection she had felt with someone who should have been her natural enemy. The turquoise bear pendant, like a dweller, should be the person who would be at Uproar's disposal. Rachel was with the body of the fallen warrior, destiny intertwined, in the midst of a storm. Mary, a woman of deep conviction, stood firm. They would think she had lost her mind, or worse, they might accuse her of sympathizing with the enemy. As she went about her morning chores, feeding the chickens and milking her cow, Abigail found herself scanning the tree line constantly. Something was coming, she could feel it in her bones, the animal sensed it too. Her milk cow, usually placid and cooperative, was skittish and kept looking toward the river with her ears pricked forward. Even the barn cat, typically lounging in sunny spots, had disappeared entirely. By mid-morning the unnatural quiet had become almost unbearable. Abigail decided to occupy herself by working in her vegetable garden, but even that familiar task couldn't calm her growing anxiety. She was tending to her bean plants when the first distant sound reached her ears, so faint she almost dismissed it as wind through the trees. But the sound of the grass was so faint that it was almost impossible to hear. The sound grew stronger, more rhythmic, and Abigail's blood turned to ice as she recognized what she was hearing. Hoofbeats. Not the irregular clip-clop of a single horse or even a small group, but the thunderous drumming of many horses moving at speed. The sound was coming from the direction of the river, growing louder with each passing second. Abigail dropped her gardening tools and ran toward the cabin, her mind racing through possibilities. A cavalry patrol? Unlikely, as the nearest fort was over 100 miles away. Settlers fleeing some disaster. The rhythm was too organized, too purposeful. No, this was something else entirely, and every instinct she possessed screamed danger. She burst through the cabin door and grabbed her rifle from above the mantelpiece, quickly checking to ensure it was loaded. Her hands shook as she poured powder and shot into the barrel. All while Abigail was still in the room. The sound of approaching horses grew louder and more ominous. Through the small window, she could see dust beginning to rise above the tree line, a brown cloud that spoke of a large group moving fast across the dry Texas landscape. Abigail positioned herself at the window with the rifle ready, trying to control her breathing and prepare for whatever was coming. The hoofbeats were so loud now they seemed to shake the very foundations of her cabin. Whatever was approaching would be visible any moment, cresting the small rise that separated her homestead from the river. When they finally appeared, the sight took Abigail's breath away. At least 60 Comanche warriors crested the hill in perfect formation, their horses painted with war symbols, their own bodies decorated with feathers, war paint, and the regalia of a people preparing for battle. They moved on. They moved on. They moved on. They moved on, like a ruler, like a military westward zoo, every rider in harmony with his mount, their weapons gleaming in the morning sun. At their head rode a figure that commanded attention even among such an impressive group. The mim overwhelming, damn like a woman, the major warrior, who had never seen him since he began to indifferent to WH and the Tengo Law mission woman a war maker, its natural beauty. The man's war bonnet contained dozens of eagle feathers, each one representing a coup counted in battle, and his chest was covered with a breastplate made from bone and decorated with intricate beadwork. But what struck Abigail most powerfully was his resemblance to Dakota, the same strong jawline, the same intelligent dark eyes, the same proud bearing that she had recognized in the young warrior she had rescued from the quicksand. This had to be a relative, possibly even Dakota's father, and if that were true, then the young man she had saved was no ordinary warrior, but someone of significant importance within the tribe. The war party halted about 50 yards from Abigail's cabin, their horses dancing with barely contained energy. The silence that followed the cessation of hoofbeats was almost more frightening than the thunderous approach had been. 60 pairs of dark eyes studied her small homestead, assessing, calculating, preparing for whatever was to come. The chief, for Abigail was certain that's what he was, urged his stallion forward several paces. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the distance, speaking in the musical cadences of the Comanche language. Though she couldn't understand the words, the tone seemed formal rather than immediately threatening. He was making some kind of announcement or declaration. From somewhere in the group another voice responded, younger and more familiar. Abigail's heart leaped as she recognized Dakota's voice, though she couldn't see him among the mass of warriors. He was speaking rapidly, gesturing toward her cabin, and she caught what sounded like her name being repeated several times. The chief listened intently to Dakota's words, occasionally asking what sounded like questions. Other warriors joined the conversation, their voices creating a complex dialogue that Abigail wished desperately she could understand. Were they debating what to do with her? Planning an attack? Discussing the circumstances of their previous encounter? After several minutes of intense discussion, the chief raised his hand for silence. The entire war party immediately fell quiet, demonstrating the absolute respect and obedience he could have had for Abigail. The chief was now in a state of shock. The entire war party immediately fell quiet, demonstrating the absolute respect and obedience he could have had for her. The chief was now in a state of shock. Abigail's hilt was taken over by Dakota, meanwhile acknowledging that her strength and resilience Hadakas were not her own. The chief had in the end been an out-of-life example of the courage and heart of the warrior, but was caught up in the rampage of the war. The honor of taking over a family was the cause of her strength which he aspired to keep. With the help of her tools, she was gradually able to leave to their own turns even though she was at her last resort. The fate of a warrior, her friends and friends who no longer served her were all a consequence of her failure to defend her nation. The chief did not talk to her. He spoke to her, and he spoke to her. Abigail's relief and Derof went a little ways in the first 2 minutes as she took a deep breath. We all knew she was a warrior. She was a warrior. If they intended violence, she was hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. But something in the chief's demeanor suggested this was not a war party bent on destruction, but something else entirely. The chief began walking toward her cabin, his pace measured and deliberate. He carried no visible weapons, his hands empty and visible. Behind him, Dakota dismounted and followed, confirming Abigail's suspicion about their relationship. The young warrior looked completely recovered from his ordeal in the quicksand, his face painted in the same war patterns as the other riders. When the 2 Comanche men reached a point about 20 feet from her door, they stopped. The chief studied Abigail's cabin with obvious interest, taking in details of her construction, her garden, the way she had arranged her small homestead. His gaze was intelligent and assessing, but not hostile. Dakota stepped forward and spoke in careful English, his pronunciation heavily accented but clear. My father, Chief Iron Bear of the Penatica Comanche, has come to speak with a white woman who saved his son from the hungry earth. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Chief Iron Bear. Chief Iron Bear. She had heard that name whispered in fearful tones around Cedar Creek. He was one of the most powerful war chiefs on the southern plains, a leader whose raids had terrorized settlements from the Brazos River to the Rio Grande. And Dakota was his son, which explained the fine quality of his clothing and the obvious respect the other warriors showed him. I am honored by your visit, Abigail replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She stepped onto her small horse, and took the horse to the river. She stepped onto her small horse, and took the horse to the river. She also pulled up on her small porch, keeping the rifle lowered but ready. She said, Dakota translated her words for his father, who listened intently before responding in Comanche. My father says that bravery without wisdom often leads to death. He asks why you risked your life to save an enemy. The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications Abigail was only beginning to understand. She replied, your partnership was my strength and honor, a bond decided in good faith, though now it lies in ruins. Through struggle and sacrifice, I remain steadfast. Saving her, this silver-hearted woman, your humble servant stood ashamed, yet understanding the pain. My son carried her title with pride, the same pride that compelled me to beg this lady to save my African son from her grasp. This wasn't just a visit of gratitude, but something far more significant. Her answer could determine not only her own fate, but possibly the relationship between the Comanche and the white settlers in the entire region. I saw a young man in danger, Abigail replied simply. I couldn't watch anyone drown regardless of who they were. When Dakota translated this, Chief Iron Bear's expression grew thoughtful. He spoke again, this time at greater length, his tone becoming more formal. My father says that in all his years of war with the white man, he has never seen such a thing. White settlers have watched Comanche warriors die without lifting a finger to help. Some have even caused such deaths deliberately. He wants to understand what kind of person you are. Abigail considered her response carefully. She sensed that this conversation was more important than the fact that she was a woman. She was more important than simple politeness. "I am a woman who has lost much to this land," she said finally. "I know what it means to watch someone you care about die. I couldn't add to that suffering, even for a stranger." The translation seemed to affect Chief Iron Bear profoundly. His stern expression softened slightly, and he exchanged a meaningful glance. With his son, he spoke again, and this time Takoda's translation carried a note of formality that suggested ritual significance. "My father says that among our people a life debt is sacred. When someone saves the life of another, it creates bonds that cannot be broken. You have saved the life of his eldest son, the heir to his leadership. This creates obligations and opportunities that must be honored." Abigail felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of obligations? Before Takoda could translate her question, Chief Iron Bear began speaking again, this time addressing not just her, but raising his voice so that the assembled warriors could hear. His tone carried the weight of official proclamation, and Abigail realized she was witnessing some kind of formal ceremony. "My father declares before all the warriors of our band that you, Abigail Hawthorne, have proven yourself to be a person of honor," Takoda translated. "He names you, Saves the Drowning, a title that will be remembered in our stories. He says that from this day forward, you are under the protection of the Penatika Comanche." The assembled warriors responded with a sound that was part war cry, part celebration, a ululating call that echoed across the Texas landscape. Abigail felt overwhelmed by the ceremony's intensity and uncertain about its implications. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked when the noise subsided. Chief Iron Bear spoke directly to her this time, in halting but understandable English. "It means, you are family now. Comanche family. No warrior will harm you. No raid will touch your land. You have, how you say, sanctuary." The magnitude of what was happening began to dawn on Abigail. She was being forced to leave the camp. She was being formally adopted into Comanche protection, something that had probably never happened to a white settler before. It was an honor of incredible significance, but also one that would forever mark her as different from her own people. "There is more," Takoda added, translating his father's continued words. "My father wishes to offer you a choice. You may remain here under our protection, living as you have but knowing you are safe, or you may come with us to our village to live among our people and learn our ways. Either choice will be honored." Abigail's mind reeled at the possibilities. Remain here as a protected person, safe from Comanche raids but potentially viewed as a traitor by other settlers, or abandon everything she had built to live among a people whose language she didn't speak and whose customs she barely understood. I need time to consider such an answer. I need time to consider such an important decision," she said finally. Chief Iron Bear nodded approvingly. "Wisdom," he said in English. "Good." He spoke again in Comanche, which Takoda translated. "My father says wise decisions require a thought. He will leave warriors here to protect you while you decide. Tomorrow at sunrise he will return for your answer." The chief turned to address his war party, issuing what sounded like a brief and detailed instructions. Immediately, 10 warriors dismounted and began setting up a camp near Abigail's cabin. They worked with practiced efficiency, clearly accustomed to making temporary camps. The remaining warriors prepared to depart, but not before Chief Iron Bear approached Abigail once more. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a beautifully crafted silver arm. The arm was a little too small for him. He was too small for him. He had never got a better armband. He gave it to a man who had no more than the size of a brick, and he had a high-quality armband decorated with turquoise stones that matched the bare pendant Takoda had given her. The workmanship was exquisite, clearly the product of master craftsmen. "This belonged to my grandmother," Chief Iron Bear said in careful English, placing the armband in Abigail's hands. "She was bridge person. Made peace between tribes. You are bridge person too, maybe, between Comanche and White Eyes. This will help you remember. This will help you remember what is possible." Abigail accepted the armband with trembling hands, understanding that she was receiving something of incredible personal and cultural significance. "I am deeply honored," she managed to say. Chief Iron Bear mounted his stallion, and the majority of the war party prepared to leave. Before departing, He spoke once more to Dakota, who would apparently remain with the guard detail. With a final nod to Abigail, he led his warriors away, their departure as dramatic and impressive as their arrival had been. As the dust settled and quiet returned to her homestead, Abigail found herself alone with 10 Comanche warriors who had been tasked with protecting her. The surreal nature of her situation struck her with full force. 3 days ago, she had been a lonely widow living in fear of Comanche raids. Now, she was under their protection, wearing their ceremonial jewelry, and faced with a decision that would change her life forever. The warrior guards set up their camp with respectful distance from her cabin, making it clear they were protectors rather than captors. Dakota approached her as evening fell, carrying 2 wooden bowls filled with some kind of stew. "You must be hungry," he said, offering her one of the bowls. "Tomorrow brings big choice. Tonight, we eat together, and I tell you about my people. Help you understand what my father offers." As they sat together sharing the simple meal, Abigail realized that her quiet life of solitude was over forever. Whether she chose to remain on her homestead or journey with the Comanche, she would never again be just another frontier widow trying to survive in hostile territory. She had become something unprecedented, a bridge between 2 worlds, a world that had known only violence and mistrust. The silver armband caught the light of her oil lamp, its turquoise stones seeming to pulse with inner fire. Tomorrow would bring a decision that would define not only her future, but possibly the fate of others caught between the 2 cultures. Tonight she would listen to Dakota's stories and try to understand what it might mean to truly belong to both worlds or neither. The Night Parts. The Night Parts. The Night Parts is a 3-minute story to tell of a woman who looks and muses for a long time. A man of Two-Till Attic was a Christian man from the Middle East, the latter part of India, and a young girl from Inamore Quality, and became Democrats. The film was presented by Perth Jones, Capel, and rather than speak the pact, it is presented by pure suspense of scene driving through the humble surrounding of the tunnel Tark Ly extremists of cinema then Hyunsei was in the Rala Rala. Have you seen this person? That might threaten the woman they had been sworn to protect. Dakota had spent much of the evening sharing stories of his people, painting a picture of Comanche, life that bore little resemblance to the savage narratives she had heard in Cedar Creek. He spoke of a complex society with intricate laws, deep spiritual beliefs, and a fierce loyalty to family and tribe that transcended individual desires. But he also didn't romanticize the reality of the situation. "My people and yours have shed much blood," he had said, as they sat together under the star-filled Texas sky. "There are warriors in my father's band who have lost brothers, sons, wives to white soldiers and settlers. They see your kindness too, me as unusual, maybe even suspicious. If you come to live among us, it will not be easy. You will have to prove yourself again and again." Abigail had listened intently, asking questions about daily life, about the role of women in Comanche society, about what would be expected of her if she chose to leave her homestead behind. Dakota answered honestly, describing a life that would be physically demanding, culturally challenging, but potentially rewarding in ways she had never imagined. "But if you stay here," he had continued, "you will be alone between 2 worlds. The white settlers will not understand why Comanche warriors protect you. They may see you as enemy, as traitor, and my people will protect you, but from distance, you will be safe but separated from both peoples." Now, as dawn approached and she knew Chief Iron Bear would soon return for her answer, Abigail felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Whatever she had decided would set precedents that could affect relations between whites and Comanches. 4 generations to come. She was being asked to be more than just a woman making a personal choice. She was being asked to become a symbol, a bridge, between worlds that had known only conflict. The eastern horizon was just beginning to lighten when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Not the thunderous charge of the previous day, but the measured pace of a smaller group arriving for a formal occasion. Chief Iron Bear appeared through the morning mist with perhaps 20 warriors, including several she hadn't seen before. These men were older, their faces bearing the lines of age and wisdom, their bearing suggesting they held positions of importance within the tribe. The chief dismounted and approached Abigail's porch. His expression grave, but not unkind. Behind him came the elder warriors, forming a semicircle that suggested this was to be a formal council rather than a simple conversation. Dakota took his place among them. But Abigail noticed that even he seemed subdued by the ceremony's solemnity. "Saves the drowning," Chief Iron Bear said, using the name he had given her the day before. The sun rises on a new day. What path will you choose? Abigail stood, her decision finally crystallized by the moment's gravity. She had spent the night thinking not just about her own future, but about what her choice might mean for others. Throughout her restless contemplation, one realization had become clear. She couldn't choose the safe path, the easy path, if she wanted to honor the trust that had been placed in her. "Great Chief," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the still morning air, "I am honored by your offer to live among your people and learn your ways. But I believe I can serve both our peoples better by remaining here, in this place between your world and mine." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Some faces showed approval, others disappointment, and a few displayed what might have been suspicion. Chief Iron Bear's expression remained carefully neutral as he waited for her to continue. "If I come to live in your village," Abigail continued, "I become part of your world, but lost to mine. The white settlers will see me as someone who abandoned her own people. But if I stay here under your protection, I can be a bridge. I can speak to both sides, help them understand each other, maybe prevent some of the bloodshed that has marked our histories." Dakota translated her words for those who might not have understood the English, and Abigail saw several of the elder warriors nodding thoughtfully. This was clearly a concept they found difficult, but she found intriguing, if not entirely comfortable. Chief Iron Bear stepped closer, studying Abigail's face intently. "You would be alone," he said, "neither fully Comanche nor fully white. This is difficult path, dangerous path. Are you strong enough for such burden?" "I don't know," Abigail admitted honestly. "But I know I have to try. Too much blood has been spilled because our peoples don't understand each other. Maybe I can help change that even in small ways." One of the elder warriors spoke up in Comanche, his tone suggesting a challenge or question. Chief Iron Bear listened, then turned back to Abigail. "Winter Moon asks how we can trust that you will speak fairly for our people when the time comes. How do we know you will not side with your own kind when trouble arises?" It was a fair question, and Abigail had anticipated it. She reached into her dress and withdrew the turquoise bear pendant Dakota had given her, holding it up so all could see. Then she rolled up her sleeve to display the silver armband Chief Iron Bear had bestowed upon her. "These are not just gifts," she said. "They are sacred trusts. When I accepted them, I accepted responsibility for the lives and honor they represent. I cannot break such trust and still live with myself. Your son's life flows in my veins now, as surely as if we shared blood. I will speak for your people as I would speak for my own family." The words seemed to carry weight with the assembled. The warriors, several exchanged meaningful glances, and even Winter Moon appeared to consider her response favorably. But it was Chief Iron Bear's reaction that mattered most, and his face remained unreadable. "There is wisdom in your choice," he said firefully. "But wisdom alone is not enough for what you propose. You must learn our ways, our language, our customs, if you are to speak for us truly. And you must prove yourself to those of my people who still doubt." "I understand," Abigail replied. "I'm willing to learn whatever is necessary." Chief Iron Bear turned to confer with his advisors. Their discussion carried out in rapid Comanche that was far too complex for Abigail to follow. She could see that the two of them were in a very close relationship. She could see that not all of them agreed with her decision, but the chief's authority was clearly absolute. When the discussion ended, he faced her once more. "We will try this path," he announced. "But there must be conditions, agreements between us, that protect both our peoples from the dangers this choice creates." Over the next hour, Abigail found herself participating in a negotiation unlike anything she had ever imagined. Chief Iron Bear, with Dakota translating the more complex concepts, laid out a framework for her new role that was both more comprehensive and more dangerous than she had anticipated. She would remain on her homestead, but it would be considered neutral ground, a place where Comanche and white emissaries could meet safely. She would learn the Comanche language and customs through regular visits from tribal teachers. In return, she would teach interested Comanches about white ways, helping them understand the motivations and methods of the settlers who were increasingly encroaching on their traditional lands. Most importantly, she would serve as an intermediary. When conflicts arose, someone both sides could trust to carry messages and negotiate solutions without the prejudice that had poisoned previous attempts at peace. "But understand, Chief Iron Bear, that the Comanche was not the only one who had the power to do so. When battle broke out in the middle of winter, her right hand, neat and sharp, slaughtered the glitzy red rock. She cool, charming, dark, deck melee of the Quivuomas, looked onto them. The best of the Qin dynasty, Apunaliai's order from Tribe of Reason, was to obliterate romance. While other rulers of the Person tribe engaged in the familiar tactics of warfare and change, she carefully navigated the unprecedented situation in Comanche history. Chief Iron Bear called forward a medicine man she hadn't noticed before, an ancient warrior whose face was marked with ritual scars and whose eyes held the depth of someone who had communed with spirits. The medicine man, introduced as Sees Far, performed a ritual blessing over Abigail that involved burning sage and chanting in a dialect so old that even Dakota struggled to translate portions of it. But the intent was clear. She was being formally recognized as a person who belonged to both worlds, someone whose word would be honored by the Comanche nation. When the ceremony concluded, Chief Iron Bear presented Abigail with a final gift, a beautiful Comanche war pony, a mare with distinctive pinto markings and intelligent eyes that seemed to assess her new owner carefully. Her name is Wind Dancer, the chief explained. She is trained for both war and peace, fast enough to carry messages, brave enough to stand in battle. She will be companion and protector, reminder of the trust we place in you. Abigail accepted. The horse with deep emotion, understanding that she was receiving not just a valuable animal but a symbol of the faith the Comanche were placing in her unprecedented role. As she stroked Wind Dancer, the mare nickered softly and nudged, her shoulders seeming to accept the bond between them. But the day's revelations were far from over. As Chief Iron Bear prepared to depart with most of his warriors, he made an announcement that sent chills down Abigail's spine. "Saves the drowning," he said formally. "Your first test comes sooner than we hoped. 3 days' ride to the east. There is trouble brewing. The first test is to be done. A group of white settlers has established a town called Harmony Falls, in a valley that our treaties guarantee to the Comanche for winter camps. They refuse to leave, and some of our young warriors speak of driving them out with fire and blade." Abigail felt her stomach tighten. "What do you want me to do?" "Go to this place," Chief Iron Bear replied. "Speak to these settlers. Learn why they have chosen to break the treaties their government made. See if there is a path to peace, or if we must prepare for war." The magnitude of what he was asking hit Abigail like a physical blow. Her first mission as a peace negotiator would involve a situation that could explode into violence at any moment, with her caught in the middle between armed settlers and angry Comanche warriors. "Will I go alone?" she asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Dakota will accompany you, along with 2 other warriors," Chief Iron Bear replied. "They will remain hidden, unless needed, but close enough to protect you if the white settlers prove hostile. You will approach as lone woman seeking to buy supplies, learn the situation without revealing your true purpose." Dakota stepped forward, his young face grave with the responsibility being placed on both of them. "My father honors you greatly by giving you this task," he said quietly. "But he also tests you. If you can bring peace to Harmony Falls, it will prove to both our peoples that your path is right." "And if I fail?" Abigail asked. Chief Iron Bear's expression grew stern. "Then many will die, and the chance for peace may be lost for generations. The weight of their lives will rest on your shoulders. Saves the drowning. Choose your words carefully when you reach Harmony Falls." As the war party prepared to leave, Abigail realized that her quiet life of solitude was truly over, forever. She was no longer just a widow trying to survive on the Texas frontier. She had become something unprecedented in the history of white Comanche relations. She was now a diplomat, a negotiator, a bridge between worlds that had forgotten how to speak to each other. And she had a clear vision and positive sense of worth. She was just the beginning of a new generation. No one could ever compare to her his spirit, as the people treasured throughout the Ing world to be the most courageous of warriors. Her spirit was only just a helping hand. Her soul was only an opportunist. Even though she was in the shadows of men, her heart and her strength was the only thing holding her back. She was unbeatable. Her decision to become a bridge between worlds was an act of heroic wisdom or tragic folly. The turquoise bear pendant felt heavy against her chest, a reminder that she now carried the hopes and fears of 2 peoples who had forgotten how to trust anyone, including themselves. The journey to Harmony Falls began at first light, with Abigail, mounted on Wind Dancer and her heart heavy with the weight of her impossible mission. Dakota rode beside her on his painted pony, while two other Comanche warriors, Bear Claw and Silent Wolf, flanked them at a distance that allowed for quick communication, but maintained the illusion that Abigail traveled with only one companion. Landscape they crossed was deceptively peaceful. Rolling hills, covered with prairie grass, that waved in the constant tension of the land, were the only things that could keep them from moving. The wind was so strong that it was like a green ocean frozen in gentle motion. Wildflowers dotted the grassland with splashes of brilliant color, Indian paintbrush, blue bonnets, and yellow evening primrose, creating a tapestry that belied the violence that had soaked this soil for decades. But Abigail's trained eye could see the signs of conflict everywhere. Burned patches where homesteads had once stood, overgrown graves marked with crude wooden crosses, and the remains of wagon trains that had ventured too far from established routes. This was contested land, a bloody frontier where survival depended on constant vigilance and the willingness to kill before being killed. As they rode, Dakota shared intelligence his father had gathered about Harmony Falls and its inhabitants. The settlement had been established just 8 months earlier by a group of families from Tennessee, led by a man named Jeremiah Blackwood, who claimed to have purchased the land legally from the state of Texas. The problem was that the land lay within territory specifically reserved for Comanche winter camps, under treaties signed with the federal government, creating a legal conflict that no one seemed willing or able to resolve. The white settlers believe they have paper that gives them right to the land, Dakota explained, as they navigated a particularly rocky strait. The land was not a stretch of terrain. But our treaties were signed before their papers. Both sides say the law is with them. What do your people want from the settlers? Abigail asked. Complete removal, or would they consider sharing the valley during certain seasons? Dakota's expression grew thoughtful. My father would accept many solutions if they were fair. The valley is large enough for both peoples if there is good faith on both sides. Some of the younger warriors grow impatient. They see every day. The settlers remain as theft of our sacred places. The conversation was interrupted by Silent Wolf, who had ridden ahead to scout their route. He returned with disturbing news delivered in rapid Comanche that made both Dakota and Bear Claw tense. Visibly. What is it? Abigail asked, noting their sudden alertness. Silent Wolf saw smoke ahead. Too much smoke for normal cooking fires. Dakota's words were unheard of. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were all in a hurry. Dakota replied grimly. Something is burning in Harmony Falls. They urged their horses to greater speed, cresting a ridge that gave them their first view of the disputed valley. What they saw made Abigail's blood run cold. Black smoke billowed from several locations within the settlement, and even from this distance they could see people running between buildings, their movements suggesting panic rather than organized activity. An attack? Abigail asked, fearing. They had arrived too late to prevent the violence Chief Iron Bear had sent her to stop, but Dakota shook his head, studying the scene with experienced eyes. No war party would attack in daylight like this, and the fires are wrong. This is something else. They descended into the valley cautiously, with Bear Claw and Silent Wolf spreading out to provide early warning. The soldiers were all in a hurry. The fire was so intense that the soldiers were trying to pick up some of the excessive smoke, but the fire was not enough to make an impact that nothing was possible. The fire was too fierce to be even more intense than a little girl's. They were at the edge of their heels, and the fire was too strong for their bodies to bear any damage. Dakota was caught up in the fire and left the area where he had fought with his army. Abigail's first instinct was to help, but Dakota caught her arm. Remember, not alone, not alone, not alone, not alone, not alone. You are supposed to be traveler seeking supplies. We cannot reveal our true purpose until we understand the situation. They rode into Harmony Falls, looking like exactly what they claimed to be. A frontier woman and her guide seeking to trade with the settlement. The town was larger than Abigail had expected, with perhaps 40 buildings arranged around a central square. Most were simple log cabins, but several more substantial structures suggested the settlers were planning to stay permanently, rather than just establishing a temporary camp. The residents were too busy fighting fires to pay much attention to newcomers. Bucket brigades stretched from the town's well to the burning buildings, with men, women, and children all participating in the desperate effort to save their homes. Abigail could see that the fire had started in what appeared to be the town's general store, and was threatening to spread to adjacent buildings. "Help us!" called a woman carrying buckets of water, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Please, we need every hand." Abigail didn't hesitate. She dismounted Wind Dancer and joined the bucket brigade, working alongside settlers she had supposedly never met before. Dakota followed her lead, though she could see several townspeople eyeing him suspiciously. A Comanche warrior helping to save their town was clearly not something they had expected to encounter. For the next 2 hours, Abigail worked side by side with the people of Harmony Falls, helping them save their settlement from destruction. The fire was eventually contained, but not before destroying the general store, a blacksmith shop, and 2 family homes. As the immediate crisis passed, and the settlers began to assess the damage, Abigail finally had a chance to observe the community she had been sent to investigate. The people of Harmony Falls were not the hardened Indian fighters she had expected. Most were families with young children, farmers and craftsmen seeking a fresh start in Texas, rather than military veterans looking for conquest. They were clearly struggling to establish themselves in this harsh environment, and the fire had set back their efforts significantly. The fire had set back their efforts significantly. The fire had set back their efforts significantly. Jeremiah Blackwood, the settlement's leader, was a tall, bearded man in his 40s, whose bearing suggested leadership experience, but not military background. When he approached to thank Abigail for her help, she could see exhaustion and worry etched deeply in his weathered features. "Ma'am, I can't thank you enough for lending a hand," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "Name's Jeremiah Blackwood, and this is my town of Harmony Falls. We don't see many travelers through these parts, especially not ones willing to help strangers in trouble." "Abigail Hawthorne," she replied, maintaining her cover story. "I was traveling through seeking supplies when we saw the smoke." "Anyone would have done the same." Blackwood's eyes shifted to Dakota, and Abigail could see the suspicion and fear that most white settlers felt when encountering any Native American. "That your guide?" he asked carefully. "He is," Abigail replied firmly. "He knows this country better than anyone, and he saved my life more than once." It wasn't entirely a lie, though not in the way Blackwood would understand it. Dakota had indeed saved her life by bringing his father's protection and opening a path she never could have imagined. "Well, any friend of yours is welcome here," Blackwood said, though his tone suggested this welcome was provisional at best. "But I have to ask, are you familiar with the Indian troubles in this area? It's not safe for a woman to be traveling with just one guide, even one who knows the country." "What kind of troubles?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious about the settlers' perspective on the situation. Blackwood's expression darkened. "Comanche war parties have been spotted throughout the region. They claim this valley belongs to them. Say we're trespassing on their winter grounds. But we've got legal title to this land, bought and paid for through proper channels. They can't just run us off because they don't like neighbors." "Have they made specific threats?" Abigail pressed, trying to gauge how close the situation was to exploding into violence. "Not directly," Blackwood admitted. "But they've been watching us. Scouts on the ridges, signs that our livestock are being observed. Some of the families are talking about leaving. But most of us have put everything we own into establishing this settlement. We can't just walk away." As evening approached, Blackwood insisted that Abigail and Dakota stay the night as his guests, an offer of frontier hospitality that would have been difficult to refuse without arousing suspicion. They were given space in the partially completed church building, along with several other families, whose homes had been damaged in the fire. That night, as the settlers gathered around campfires to share food and discuss their situation, Abigail listened carefully to conversations that revealed the complexity of their predicament. These weren't land-hungry speculators or military adventurers seeking to provoke conflict with Native Americans. They were genuinely desperate people who had invested their life savings in what they believed was legitimate land ownership. "My wife and I lost our farm in Tennessee to debt," explained a man named Samuel Porter, whose family included 3 young children. We sold everything we had left to buy our share of this valley. If we leave now, we'll have nothing. Our children will grow up in poverty." Similar stories emerged from other families. A blacksmith whose business had failed in the economic panic of the 1840s. A widow with 2 teenage sons who had no other options for supporting herself. Young couples starting their married lives with dreams of prosperity that seemed within reach in Texas but impossible back east. But Abigail also heard darker conversations. A group of younger men, led by Blackwood's son Marcus, spoke angrily about the Comanche presence in the area and advocated for aggressive action to drive them away permanently. "We didn't come all this way to be terrorized by savages," Marcus declared loudly enough for others to hear. "If they want to fight, I say, we give them one they won't forget." "Hush that talk," his father warned. "We're trying to build a peaceful community here, not start a war." "Peace doesn't work with Indians, Pa," Marcus replied, with the certainty of youth. "You can't negotiate with people who don't understand anything but force." Abigail exchanged a meaningful glance with Dakota, who had been listening to these conversations with carefully concealed tension. She could see that he was struggling, with anger at the casual prejudice and ignorance being displayed, but he maintained his role as her silent guide with admirable discipline. Later that night, when most of the settlers had fallen asleep, Abigail found an opportunity to speak privately with Jeremiah Blackwood. She approached him carefully, knowing that her next words could determine whether peace was possible or whether violence was inevitable. "Mr. Blackwood," she began quietly, "may I speak frankly with you about the Indian situation? The settlement." Leda looked up from the papers he had been studying by firelight, documents that appeared to be land deeds and legal correspondence. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. Do you have experience with such matters?" "Some," Abigail replied carefully. "I've lived on the frontier long enough to know that most conflicts come from misunderstanding rather than genuine evil on either side. Have you ever actually spoken with any Comanche representatives about sharing this valley?" Blackwood's expression grew skeptical. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't negotiate with people who don't respect the Indian situation. We respect the rule of law. We have legal title to this land. That should be the end of the discussion. But what if the Comanche have legal claims, too?" Abigail pressed. "What if there are federal treaties that guarantee them access to this valley? Wouldn't it be better to find a solution that honors both sets of rights rather than fighting a war that could destroy everything you've built here?" For a moment, Blackwood seemed to consider her words. "Do you know something specific about such?" "Our treaties?" he asked. This was the moment Abigail had been preparing for, the crucial point where she would have to reveal at least part of her true purpose. "I know that the Comanche consider this valley sacred ground, used for winter camps for generations. I also know that they're not unreasonable people if approached with respect and good faith." "How could you possibly know that?" Blackwood asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Abigail took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would irrevocably commit her to the dangerous path she had chosen. "Because I've spoken with them. Because they've offered to negotiate. A peaceful solution, if your people are genuinely interested in coexistence rather than conquest." The silence that followed her revelation was deafening. Blackwood stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and fear, clearly trying to understand what she was telling him. "You've spoken with the Comanche?" he asked slowly. "How is that possible?" "It's a long story," Abigail replied. "But the important thing is that Chief Iron Bear, their leader, has authorized me to explore whether peace is possible. He's willing to meet with representatives of your community to discuss terms that might allow him to do so. He's willing to allow both peoples to use this valley without conflict." Blackwood's hand moved instinctively toward the pistol at his belt, a gesture that Dakota noticed immediately. The young Comanche warrior tensed, ready to defend Abigail if necessary, but she caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Blackwood said carefully, "are you telling me that you're some kind of intermediary between the Comanche and white settlers?" "I'm telling you that I'm someone who has seen too much bloodshed and wants to prevent more," Abigail replied. "Your families deserve the chance to build peaceful lives here. So do the Comanche families who have used this valley for generations. Maybe there's a way for both to be true." The weight of decision hung heavy in the night air as Jeremiah Blackwood wrestled with concepts that challenged everything he had believed about the frontier, about Indians, and about the nature of ownership itself. His answer would determine whether Harmony Falls became the site of breakthrough negotiations or a battlefield soaked with the blood of two peoples who had forgotten how to trust. The dawn that broke over Harmony Falls carried with it an ominous stillness that made Abigail's skin crawl with foreboding. She had spent a sleepless night waiting for Jeremiah Blackwood's response to her revelation, and she had been waiting for the moment when to fight the fires that had threatened their community. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. "Well, well," Marcus sneered, his finger resting dangerously close to his rifle's trigger. "The Comanche spy and her savage friend thought they could fool us with their act of helping. Put out fires. But we're not as stupid as you thought we were." Abigail raised her hand slowly, trying to project calm, while her mind raced through pockets. She would have tried to warm the flames by causing the fire to set out. She would have tried to calm the flames each time, even if she was unable to take them. She would have tried to calm the flames each time, but she never could. "There, the only misunderstanding," Marcus replied vigorously, "was that of the young man's curiosity. The only misunderstanding was that of the young man's curiosity." Viciously. "It was us thinking you were a decent white woman instead of an Indian-loving traitor. My father might be fool enough to listen to your lies about peace and negotiation, but some of us know what needs to be done." One of the other armed settlers, a man named Caleb Wright, whose family had lost their home in the fire, stepped forward with a length of rope. "We're going to tie you both up nice and tight, then use you as bait to draw in that Comanche war party. When Chief Iron Bear comes looking for his spy and his son, we'll be ready for them." The full scope of their plan hit Abigail like a physical blow. These young hothead hadn't just discovered her identity. They intended to use her and Dakota as bait for an ambush that would result in massive bloodshed on both sides. Everything she had wanted to do was to kill her. All the delicate trust Chief Iron Bear had placed in her would be destroyed in a single act of treacherous violence. "You don't understand what you're doing," Abigail said desperately. "Chief Iron Bear will bring hundreds of warriors if he believes his son has been captured or killed. You'll be starting a war that will consume this entire region." "Good," Marcus replied with a frightening certainty of youth, convinced of its own righteousness. "It's time to finish what should have been settled years ago. Texas doesn't have room for both civilized people and savages." As the settlers moved to bind their prisoners, a commotion erupted from the direction of the town square. Shouts and the sound of running feet suggested some new crisis was developing, causing Marcus to hesitate and look toward the source of the disturbance. "What?" "No," he muttered, just as he was. 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 Marcus had beenting on being banned for loan from his land. He muttered, just as he was. Ready to surrender, he tried to stop scouts from freedom, and announced his gaze intoxicated in the little jujitsu. "Gracias, delicious food I'm looking forward to as well." He did not respond at all. Falls must have seen the armed confrontation and ridden back to warn Chief Iron Bear. The chief, believing his son was in immediate danger, was likely approaching. With a substantial war party to rescue Dakota and punish those who had threatened him, Marcus's eyes lit up with savage satisfaction. Perfect. How many riders? At least 50, maybe more. They're riding hard and they're painted for war. The young settler leader turned back to Abigail with a cruel smile. "Looks like our bait worked even better than expected. We'll position ourselves in the buildings around the square, let them ride right into our trap. When the shooting starts, you and your savage friend will be the first to die." But Abigail could see that Marcus had fundamentally misunderstood the tactical situation. The approaching Comanche warrants were not to be used. The soldiers weren't riding blindly into an ambush. They were experienced fighters who had survived decades of warfare against both Mexican and American forces. They would scout the settlement, identify defensive positions, and plan their attack accordingly. More importantly, the settlers of Harmony Falls were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, craftsmen, and families with children who had no experience in warfare beyond hunting wild game. Against seasoned Comanche warriors fighting to rescue their chief's son, they would be slaughtered regardless of their defensive advantages. "Marcus," Abigail said urgently, This isn't going to end the way you think. Those warriors are coming to rescue Dakota, not to attack your settlement. If you release us now and let us go to them, we can still prevent this from becoming a massacre. The poor. Only massacre, Marcus replied coldly, will be of the Indians stupid enough to ride into the city. But he was right. The steppes were running away from us. Ningwick was not there at this time. It was something that mentality could not do. But he saw that the fight was going to be a hell of a fight. A battle was set on the front lines of the revenue army. But when the battle was over, the morning of that day, the colonel called the attack in the light of morning light with an unremarkable shadow of a man's face. The incredible war was set loose in the area of the revenue army. Nevertheless, the war in the area of the revenue army was long gone, and many were peacefully returned. The battle was sometimes slow, and the armed settlers were still in the area of a long, dark land. But while amateurs did them a great deal of service, it was a nice thing that they had experienced warriors coordinating their attack. Dakota spoke for the first time since their capture, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of profound sadness. You have made a terrible mistake. My father does not negotiate with those who take prisoners through treachery. When he arrives, he will show no mercy to anyone who threatened his son. We'll see about that, Marcus snarled, but Abigail could see doubt beginning to creep into his expression as more war cries answered the first, coming from multiple directions around the settlement. The tactical situation was developing exactly as Abigail had feared. The Comanche warriors weren't charging straight into the town's defensive positions, but were instead surrounding Harmony Falls, cutting off all escape routes while they prepared for a coordinated assault. These weren't wild savages attacking in mindless fury, but disciplined fighters implementing a sophisticated battle plan. Within the settlement, panic was beginning to spread as the reality of their situation became clear. Families with children were barricading themselves in the sturdiest buildings, while the men scrambled to defensive positions with whatever weapons they could find. But Abigail could see that they were woefully fighting. The Comanche warriors were now the only ones in the town, unprepared for warfare against experienced Comanche raiders. Marcus, she tried one more time, it's not too late to prevent this. Let me go to Chief Iron Bear under a flag of truce. I can explain that this was a misunderstanding, that most of your people want peace, but if the fighting starts, there won't be any going back. For a moment, Abigail thought she saw uncertainty flicker across the young man's face, but before he could respond, his father Jeremiah arrived at a run, his face flushed with exertion and fear. Marcus, what in God's name have you done? The elder Blackwood demanded. I told you I wanted time to consider Mrs. Hawthorne's proposal, not to take her prisoner. She's a spy, Pa, Marcus replied defensively. She's been working with the Indians all along, probably planning to help them attack us. I did what I could. What needed to be done? Jeremiah looked around at the armed men surrounding Abigail and Dakota, then at the defensive preparations being made throughout the settlement. His face went ashen as he realized the full implications of his son's actions. You fool, he whispered. You've doomed us all. Before Marcus could respond, a new sound cut through the morning air, the thunderous drumming of many horses approaching at full gallop. Chief Iron Bear and his war party arrived, and from the sound of it, he had brought far more warriors than the 50 initially spotted. Everyone to positions, Marcus shouted, but his voice cracked with nervousness that belied his earlier confidence. As the settlers scrambled to their defensive posts, Abigail found herself being dragged toward the town square, still bound, but now serving as a human shield as well as bait. Dakota was hauled along beside her, his face stoic, but his eyes blazing with controlled fury at the dishonor being shown to both of them. The war party that thundered into view was the most magnificent and terrifying sight Abigail had ever witnessed. Nearly 100 Comanche warriors, mounted on painted war ponies, filled the approaches to Harmony Falls, their weapons gleaming in the morning sun. Their war paint making them appear like supernatural beings bent on vengeance. At their head rode Chief Iron Bear, his face a mask of cold fury that spoke of death for those who had dared threaten his son. But what struck Abigail most powerfully was the discipline of the war party. Despite their obvious anger, they didn't charge immediately into the settlement. Instead, they took strategic positions surrounding the war party. While their chief surveyed the tactical situation. the standoff that followed was more terrifying than any battle could have been. 100 Comanche warriors faced perhaps 30 armed settlers across a distance of less than 200 yards, with the lives of women and children hanging in the balance. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the nervous whickering of horses and the distant crying of frightened children. Chief Iron Bear urged his black stallion forward several paces, close enough that his voice would carry clearly to the settlement. When he spoke, it was in English accented but perfectly clear, designed to ensure that every settler understood exactly what he was saying. "I am Chief Iron Bear of the Pennetico Comanche. You hold my son and the woman who saved his life. Release them now, and some of you may live to see another sunrise." Marcus Blackwood stepped forward, using Abigail as a human shield, while he shouted his response. "We know she's your spy. We know you're planning to attack our settlement. If you come any closer, we'll kill them both." The threat hung in the air, between the two groups, like a physical thing, loaded with the potential for devastating violence. Abigail could see the muscles in Chief Iron Bear's jaw working as he fought to control his rage, and the rest of the men were in a state of panic. The men were in a state of panic at seeing his son held captive and threatened. But it was Dakota who broke the deadly silence, calling out to his father in Comanche. His words were too rapid and complex for Abigail to follow, but she could tell from the tone that he was trying to prevent the massacre that was about to unfold. Chief Iron Bear listened to his son's words, then responded in the same language. Their conversation continued for several minutes, with other warriors and soldiers of the Pennetico Comanche, who were in the same situation. They were all to intervene. But their words didn't stop them, as while they were interviewing the soldiers, details of the massacres began to emerge. With their families, their families, their families, their own families, the great families, and their own families were desperately wounded, they were all being killed and buried. The soldiers who knocked them down were shooting their guns. Thicono, the first of their own soldiers, had just fired one. Abigail's son said, "I know that a lot of you continued to fight the terrorists before we set the fire in a change of pace, but I can't give you the information on cleaning up the city, the resources, and the bloodshed. It's incredible to see them continue to be busy, with rather strict rules, and the violence, they may come and go, so come on, let us talk. Let them take all the bloodshed from the city. Let them fight for which we was being planned." Finally, Chief Iron Bear addressed the settlers once more. "My son tells me that some of you helped fight fires yesterday, that you showed kindness to Saves the Drowning when she aided your community. For their sake, I will give you one chance to end this without bloodshed." "We're listening, Jeremiah," Blackwood called out, pushing past his son despite Marcus's angry protests. "Release my son and the woman," Chief Iron Bear continued. "Send out those who took them prisoner. The rest of you will be allowed to leave this valley unharmed. You have until the sun reaches its highest point to decide." The ultimatum was clear and generous given the circumstances, but Abigail could see that it would never be accepted by the hotheads who had created this crisis. Marcus and his followers were too committed to their course of action to back down now, and too convinced of their own righteousness to see the disaster they were bringing down upon their community. "We're not giving up our land to savages," Marcus shouted back. "This is our home now, and we'll fight to keep it." Chief Iron Bear's expression hardened at the rejection of his offer. He spoke briefly to his war leaders, and Abigail could see them beginning to position their warriors for the attack that would come when his deadline expired. The sun climbed higher in the Texas sky, marking the passage of time toward a moment that would determine whether Harmony Falls would survive the day or become another burned ruin on the contested frontier. Caught between two worlds that had forgotten how to trust each other, Abigail watched helplessly as the fragile hope for peace she had tried to build crumbled into the inevitable tragedy of violence and vengeance. With less than an hour remaining, the battle was at the mercy of the people. Before Chief Iron Bear's deadline, the only question left was how many innocents would die when the killing finally began. The sun climbed mercilessly toward its zenith as the standoff at Harmony Falls reached its breaking point. With less than 30 minutes remaining before Chief Iron Bear's deadline, the settlement had descended into chaos as families fled in panic while the younger men prepared for a battle they couldn't possibly win. But it was in this moment of deepest despair that Abigail discovered an ally she never could have expected. Emma Blackwood, Jeremiah's wife and Marcus's mother, approached the group of armed men surrounding the prisoners with a determination that surprised everyone present. The middle-aged woman had spent the morning organizing the evacuation of children and elderly residents, But now she moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a life-altering decision. "Marcus Blackwood, you release those people. Right now," she commanded in a voice that carried the absolute authority of motherhood pushed beyond its limits. "Ma, this isn't your concern," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm protecting our family, our community." "You're destroying everything we came here to build," Emma shot back, her eyes blazing with fury. Emma's voice was unhealed. She was not alone. 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 That woman saved our general store yesterday. She worked alongside our neighbors to protect our homes, and this is how you repay kindness? By making her a hostage? Other women began emerging from their hiding places, drawn by Emma's courageous stand. Mary Porter, whose husband had spoken of their desperate circumstances the night before, stepped forward with her 3 young children clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Blackwood is right," Mary declared, her voice shaking but determined. "We came here to build new lives, not to start wars. If there's a chance for peace, we have to take it." One by one, the women of Harmony Falls began joining Emma Blackwood in her confrontation with the armed men. They formed a protective circle around Abigail and Dakota, their presence making it impossible for Marcus and his followers to maintain their hostage strategy without risking harm to their own wives, mothers, and sisters. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, panic beginning to creep into his voice as he realized his support was crumbling. "What we should have done from the beginning," Emma replied firmly. She turned to address Abigail directly. "Mrs. Hawthorne, if you truly have influence with Chief Iron Bear, can you stop this bloodshed?" Abigail felt a surge of hope for the first time since her capture. "I believe so, but I need to be able to speak with him." She listened, and she spoke without hesitation. She had been in the battle for the world for a long time. She had been in the battle for the world for a long time. She had been at the crossroads of her own destiny. Emma nodded, and began cutting the ropes that bound Abigail's hands, ignoring her son's angry protests. "Mary, help me with the young man," she called, and together the 2 women freed Dakota from his bonds. "Ma, you don't know what you're doing," Marcus shouted, raising his rifle as if to stop them. But his father Jeremiah appeared at that moment, having witnessed the confrontation from across the field. She was taken out of the battle. He dropped the gun and shot her. She went back to work, but she was not seen. She was not seen. She was not seen. She was just sitting there. She was not seen. She was not seen. She was across the square. The older man approached his son with a mixture of disappointment and determination that spoke volumes about the family dynamics playing out in this crisis. "Son, lower that weapon," Jeremiah commanded. "You've caused enough damage for one day." "But she's working with the Indians. She's going to help them destroy us." "Look around you, Marcus," Jeremiah replied sadly. "Look at what your actions have already done. Half our families are fleeing in terror, the other half are preparing to die fighting. Is this the community we wanted to build?" The confrontation between father and son played out while precious minutes ticked away toward Chief Iron Bear's deadline. Abigail could see the Comanche warriors growing restless in their positions, their horses dancing with barely contained energy as they awaited the order to attack. "I have to go to Chief Iron Bear now," Abigail told Emma urgently. "Every moment we delay increases the chance that this will end in bloodshed." Emma nodded and stepped aside, but not before pressing something into Abigail's hand. It was a small wooden cross, carved with obvious care and worn smooth by handling. "This belonged to my mother," Emma said quietly. "She always said it would protect those who carried God's peace into dark places." I'm sorry. "Maybe it will help you now," Abigail accepted. The cross, with deep gratitude, understanding the profound trust being placed in her. As she prepared to walk toward the Comanche lines, Dakota caught her arm. "My father is very angry," he warned quietly. "The insult of taking prisoners under a flag of truce is not easily forgiven. You must choose your words carefully." Together, they began walking across the open ground between the settlement and the war party, their every step watched by over 100 pairs of eyes. Abigail could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Harmony Falls became a symbol of successful coexistence or another tragic footnote in the long history of frontier violence. Chief Iron Bear watched their approach with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Behind him, the assembled warriors sat their horses, with the patience of predators waiting for the signal to strike. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of footsteps on grass and the distant crying of children being evacuated from the settlement. When they reached the chief's position, Dakota immediately began speaking in rapid Comanche, clearly explaining the circumstances of their capture and release. Chief Iron Bear listened without interruption, his dark eyes occasionally flicking to Abigail as his son described her treatment by the settlers. When Dakota finished his account, Chief Iron Bear studied Abigail for a long moment before speaking. "My son tells me that some of the white women stood against their own men to free you. This surprises me." "They are good people caught in a bad situation," Abigail replied. "Most of them are innocent. They are not the only ones. Most of them want peace. But fear and misunderstanding have created this crisis. There's still time to prevent tragedy if both sides are willing to step back from violence. Some of their men took you prisoner after you came to them in good faith," Chief Iron Bear pointed out, his voice carrying the weight of deep anger. "They threatened to kill my son. Such dishonor cannot go unpunished." Abigail could see the justice in his position, but she also understood that vengeance would destroy any possibility of the peace she had been trying to build. "Big Chief, I ask you to consider something. Punishing the guilty is just, but punishing the innocent, along with them, serves no justice at all." She gestured toward the settlement, where women and children could be seen fleeing the area. "Most of those people had nothing to do with taking us prisoner, their families seeking new lives, not warriors seeking conquest. But if your son is innocent, you are no longer worthy of justice. Conquest. If you destroy them, all you destroy the very people who might have become allies." Chief Iron Bear's expression remained impassive, but Abigail could see that her words were having some effect. Behind him, she noticed several of the elder warriors listening intently to their conversation, their faces thoughtful rather than purely hostile. "What do you propose?" the chief asked finally. Abigail took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save Harmony Falls or condemn it to destruction. "Let me return to the settlement with a different offer, not surrender, but partnership. The valley is large enough for both peoples if there's cooperation instead of conflict." "You speak of partnership," Chief Iron Bear replied skeptically. "But how can there be trust after what has happened today?" "By proving that honor still matters," Abigail said. "You've shown honor by giving them a chance to surrender peacefully. Now let me show them that some white people can be trusted to honor their agreements." The chief considered her proposal for several minutes, occasionally conferring with his war leaders in hushed Comanche. Finally, he reached a decision that surprised everyone present. "I will do my best to help you. I will give you one more chance, saves the drowning," he announced. "But this time, you will not go alone. I will come with you to speak directly with their leaders. If they show honor, we will speak of sharing this valley. If they show treachery again, there will be no more mercy." The decision to have Chief Iron Bear personally enter the settlement was unprecedented and incredibly dangerous. If the hotheads among the settlers chose to attack him, it would trigger a massacre that would cause a great deal of damage to the people. "I understand the risk you're taking," Abigail said. "I give you my word that I will protect you with my life if necessary." Chief Iron Bear nodded solemnly. "And I give you mine that if we are betrayed again, my vengeance will be seen." The procession that approached Harmony Falls was unlike anything the frontier had ever seen. Chief Iron Bear rode at the center, flanked by Abigail and Dakota, with 20 of his most senior warriors providing escort, but these weren't painted for war. They had removed their battle decorations and rode with weapons lowered, making it clear that they came for parley rather than battle. The effect on the settlement was a great one. The battle 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 was a great one. The settlement was immediate and profound. The sight of the feared Comanche war chief approaching, under a flag of truce, sent waves of shock and confusion through the defenders. Some raised their weapons, But others, led by Jeremiah Blackwood and the women who had freed the prisoners, called for restraint. "No one fires unless I give the word," Jeremiah commanded, asserting his authority over the chaos his son had created. "We're going to hear what they have to say." The delegation halted in the town square, with Chief Iron Bear dismounting and standing in the open where everyone could see him. For a moment, the two groups simply stared at each other across the cultural divide that had separated them for so long. Then Chief Iron Bear began to speak, his voice carrying clearly across the settlement. He spoke in English, clearly and deliberately, ensuring that every settler could understand his words. "I am Chief Iron Bear of the Pennatica Comanche. I come to you not as an enemy, but as a leader seeking to prevent the deaths of innocents on both sides. This morning, some of your people dishonored themselves by taking prisoners under false pretenses, but I have been told that others among you acted with honor, protecting those prisoners, and seeking peace." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "I could have taken vengeance for the insult to my son and to the woman who saved his life. My warriors are prepared to make this valley run red with blood, but I choose instead to offer you something that has never been offered before: the chance to share this land in peace." A murmur ran through the assembled settlers, some skeptical, others hopeful. "The chief," I replied, "but I do not ask you to leave. I ask you to consider that two peoples can share a place here. I ask you to consider that two peoples can share a place here. One land if they respect each other's rights and needs." Over the next hour, what followed was the most extraordinary negotiation in frontier history. With Abigail serving as translator for subtle cultural nuances and Dakota providing insight into both perspectives, Chief Iron Bear and the settlers of Harmony Falls worked out an agreement that neither side could have imagined just days before. The Comanche would maintain their traditional rights to use the valley for winter camps, but would do so in the northern section where the settlers had not yet established permanent structures. The settlers would keep their town and farmlands in the southern section, but would respect Comanche's sacred sites and hunting grounds. More importantly, the two communities would cooperate in matters of mutual benefit. The settlers' medical knowledge would be shared with the Comanche. The Comanche would be the first to establish a trade agreement with the Comanche, while the tribe's knowledge of the land and its resources would help the newcomers survive and prosper. Trade agreements were established that would benefit both peoples. The agreement was sealed with ceremonies that honored both cultures. Chief Iron Bear presented Jeremiah Blackwood with a peace pipe, while Blackwood offered the chief a written document guaranteeing the settlers' adherence to their promises. But the most significant moment of the agreement was the time when the Comanche and the settlers were able to meet. The Comanche were able to meet, not as enemies, but as allies. Time and again, they proved their resilience, in battle, in diplomacy, even in the face of the med wars that had ravaged the land. Now, as the Center for Food and Sustenance prepared to open on June 23rd, the Comanche stood firm, their presence a silent protest against broken treaties. The crisis deepened when the hot-headed settler, blind to reason, approached Chief Iron Bear directly. The young man's face was filled with shame as he spoke. "Chief Iron Bear, I owe you and your son an apology. I let fear and prejudice drive me to dishonorable actions. I ask for your forgiveness, and the chance to prove that I can be better." The chief readied the young settler for a long moment before responding. "Honor is not about never making mistakes. It is about learning from them and choosing to do better. You have taken the first step on that path." As the sun began to set over the valley that had come so close to becoming a battlefield, Abigail stood watching the two communities begin the delicate process of learning to coexist. Children from both groups played together under their parents' watchful eyes, while adults engaged in cautious but friendly conversations about trade and cooperation. Dakota approached her as she stood contemplating the day's remarkable victory. "My father wishes to know if you will remain in Harmony Falls to help ensure the agreement is kept." Abigail considered the question carefully. "For a while, yes, but my real work is just beginning. There are other communities, other conflicts, that could benefit from what we've learned here today." She looked out over the valley where Comanche and white settlements now coexisted peacefully, then down at the turquoise bear pendant and saw the silver armband that marked her as a bridge between worlds. "This was never just about Harmony Falls," she continued. "It was about proving that peace is possible if people are willing to see past their fears and prejudices to the humanity in each other." As the first stars appeared in the Texas sky, Abigail realized that her journey was far from over. Word of the Harmony Falls Agreement would spread throughout the frontier, inspiring hope in some and fear in others. There would be those who would try to destroy what had been built here, and others who would seek to replicate it elsewhere. But for tonight, in this small valley where two worlds had learned to trust each other, peace reigned supreme. And sometimes, as Abigail had learned, that's how change really happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but through one person choosing to extend a hand across the world, and that's how change really happens. A hand across the divide, one community choosing to build bridges instead of walls, one moment at a time. The turquoise bear pendant caught the starlight as Abigail made her way back toward the settlement, carrying with her the knowledge that she had found her true calling. She was no longer just a lonely widow trying to survive on the frontier. She had become what Chief Iron Bear had seen in her from the beginning, a bridge between worlds, a bearer of hope. In a land that had known too much sorrow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Harmony Falls lived up to its name at last. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.